Hi, welcome back to Hands-on History. My name is Rachel Goldberg and I'm the programs coordinator at the Manassas Museum. Today we are inspired by some beautiful works of art in our collection, and that is quilts. We have dozens of quilts in the collection at the Manassas Museum, and we always have two on view in our main gallery. We do change those two out from time to time, so when we're open again, you can come on by, see what quilts we have on view, and then come by a few months later and see if we've changed them out. So we're also celebrating Juneteenth, and Juneteenth is the day when the news of the Emancipation Proclamation finally made it to Texas, which was the last slaveholding state at that time. That was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed. So we are celebrating Juneteenth. We are inspired by some of the works of art in our collection, and we're also inspired by this beautiful book by Patricia McKissick called Stitchin' and Pullin' a Gee's Bend Quilt. So the Gee's Bend is a rural area in Alabama that's well known for its quilts. It's very remote, and the women there have been making quilts for a long time, and it's a long storied tradition. And this beautiful book tells the story from this young woman's eyes as she learns the family tradition of making these Gee's Bend quilts. She talks in the book a bit about her process and why certain things are chosen, and she talks about the different cloths that she uses. She says, "The black corduroy remembers that it was once the pants my uncle wore to go vote for the first time, all clean and new." And she talks about other cloths that she's using in her quilt and what that cloth remembers and the memory that it'll bring to her. She also talks a bit about her color choices, and for this particular piece, she says the brown edges represent the river that borders Gee's Bend, and the strip of green represents the fields where her ancestors were enslaved. There's also, in another page, she talks about a smoke gray square that stands for hard times, and a spotless white patch that stands for the hope that Dr. King brought to Gee's Bend. And then she goes on to talk about how she makes these squares and patches and then goes on to puzzle the pieces until they tell the story that she wants to tell. So I've gone ahead and made a quilt today. We are making a quilt using some of the papers that we've designed together in previous hands-on history sessions. And I have made a small quilt out of some of these papers. I've also I've used some textured paper and other very simple papers that I've found around the house. So you can see in my quilt, I haven't followed traditional patterns of quilting. I've just sort of made them tell my own story. I've used colors that I like and that remind me of things that are important to me. I've used shapes for different reasons in different places, and I've laid them out in this square. You could make a square or a rectangle with your quilt squares. You could line the in-betweens with ribbon if you wanted to. You could sew them together if you're good at sewing. You could even make little loops and tie them together if you wanted to do that. Or something that I might do with this piece is put it on a harder backing and put it in a frame and hang it on the wall. Be a pretty little wall hanging. So however you choose to use your quilt is up to you. Let's talk a little bit about what you'll need to make your quilt squares. It's pretty simple. Your supplies are pretty simple. I've got some plain white cardstock that I have cut down to little 5 by 5 inch squares. So we're gonna start off with one of these. You might want some scissors. So our hands-on history videos typically appeal to the whole family. But when it comes to things like scissors, probably even glue stick and other glues, adults might want to assist their younger people in the house. So I also have for this quilt some of the papers that we've made in our designing our own paper video. And we used some of these papers as well in our flag making video when we were celebrating Flag Day. So with that, we'll get started. When I was making my quilt, I was thinking about design and pattern and how I wanted it to lay out most of the time, but then other times I was just taking whatever I had for scraps of paper and sort of fitting it on my square and seeing how it laid out. So with this one, I'm gonna start with some small scraps that I had left over and then see where we go from there. So something that I have found that makes things go a little faster and makes things a little easier is to just go ahead and put down a solid layer of glue, or in this case, glue stick, on your square, because that way you can just start sticking things and it's a little less messy, believe it or not. So I'm just gonna start, and I'm not gonna worry about lining things up perfectly. And I'm going to make this go from corner to corner and stick it down really well. And then I'm going to take one of these beige ones and I'm going to put it down. Also, actually, I'm going to sneak this green one in also, corner to corner underneath here. And then put this brown one down. And then I'm going to take an orange one and also keep going with this sort of woven look. I'm gonna take this other piece of orange because this orange wasn't long enough to go all the way across, which is totally fine. But I'm gonna take this piece of orange and tuck it under here. You never even know that it's not the same piece of paper. And then I'm gonna take my scissors, and you see how my papers are hanging over my square. I'm gonna take these scissors and make real nice edges and just snip, snip until I have nice clean edges. And I'm just snipping off that paper along the lines of the square. So just cutting it down. If you have a paper cutter at home, or if you're working with an X-Acto knife, you might be able to cut this before you put it down, but I find this to be an easier and faster way to work. So then it looks like we cut perfect edges on our strips of paper. So now if you wanted to, you could take these little squares that I just, triangles that we just cut off and add them in here. All this really needs now is some triangles. So I think I will take a piece of patterned paper and make sure I have a real clean line. Then I'm going to put it in where I have a blank triangle. I'm gonna turn this over and cut it off. And then we can keep doing that all the way around. Actually, I'm gonna go over here with this one. And then cut this one off. And then I'm gonna take a different texture of the same color paper and do my other two triangles. And again, just sort of press it into the glue, turn it over and cut it off. And I'm making very abstract patterns, which means that they're just colorful, and they're sort of shape-based, sort of line and shape-based. But you could do yours to be more representative. You could use pictures from a magazine on your quilt squares. You could use old family pictures on your quilt squares. If you're an amazing artist, you could use paper and cut out, you know, blue puffy clouds and green hills, however you'd like to do it. I prefer the abstract lines and shapes. So this is just a quick quilt square that I made. I put my quilt square down, I put the glue stick on top of the quilt square, and then I put my different shapes of paper on the quilt square to make a pattern. And then you just keep making lots of these, and eventually you'll have a quilt of your own. Thanks for joining us for Hands-On History. We'll see you again next time.